Let's talk some football. There is a lot of football going on as the mini camps underway. And also, we've got news with one Carson Wentz. And when Carson Wentz speaks, John McMullen, we listen. John McMullen with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What's happening, John?
What's happening, guys?
A lot of panic in the Delaware Valley today.
Well, as I always say, when you encourage a groupthink mentality for years and then expect critical thinking over emotion, it's not going to work that way. So you have a lot of emotional people not realizing this is, especially the top-end talent on the Sixers, is just too young. And you see it, to me, the biggest disappointments have been Ben Simmons and Dario Saric. I think that's pretty obvious. But even when you look at a Joel Embiid, who's so talented, but you see the ends of these games, and you sort of remember he hasn't played a lot of basketball. And it sort of reminds you of that. And I joked that Al Horford, obviously he doesn't have as much talent as Joel Embiid, but he's got a higher basketball IQ than the entire Sixers team. That's kind of where you're at. But that stuff, that takes years to develop.
Yeah, and the experience. We talk about it, Now, somebody brought up an interesting point that the Eagles did not have a lot of playoff experience. Peterson, none. Foles, none. And yet, they were able to win. I don't think it's the same. Let me ask you, do you think the level of play from an NBA playoff game to an NBA regular season game rivals the change of an NFL regular season game to an NFL playoff game?
Well, I always think you have a real kick up in emotion, and far as, the thing about the NBA that's different than the NFL is obviously it's a series. And the biggest difference between playoff basketball and regular season basketball is the adjustments made in between games. And the fact that instead of worrying about your next game on Friday, you're focusing on one team, you're making adjustments to what that team does, and you run into a team that's tremendously athletic, has a very good coach, and is a bad matchup for you. I always say styles make fights. Mm-hmm. This is a bad matchup for the 76ers because there's so many athletes on the other roster, and they don't have to help defensively, and the Sixers don't have players who can create their own offense. That's the issue.
A lot of that. Yeah, they don't have a lot of adjustments to make because they don't have the personnel to make the adjustments.
Yeah, they don't, especially from an offensive standpoint. I think there's things Brett could have done to tweak. I think he could have gotten his better athletes on the floor for short stretches. But let's face it, you're nitpicking when you're talking about guys like Anderson or Holmes or, one of my big pet peeves, he should have went to Ilyasova a lot when it was clear that Dario is struggling so much. And if he's not making shots, he's getting exposed defensively. So you can say he should have done a few things here and there, but it wouldn't have made a great difference.
Mm-hmm. Let's get into some football here with John McMullen. 97.3 ESPN.com is where you can check out all of John's Eagles coverage.
And by the way, before we get to the football, maybe point out that John covered the NBA for many, many years. He's just pulling this out of left field from having a Schlitz and sitting in his armchair on a Saturday.
No, yeah, I covered a lot of NBA finals, a lot of NBA playoff basketball, and it's a different animal. And I don't think people realize how different it is.
Do you think experience is a factor?
Oh yeah, yes, it is the factor.
You're laughing, but we're getting text messages saying that experience is BS.
Well, the disappointment comes in the fact that, and I'll use Simmons as the biggest example because he's so talented. He's not played well.
Not at all.
And that makes things difficult. Now, if he plays up to his capabilities, you're probably talking about a different series, and then you're not talking about experience. But why has he struggled so much? Because he's not used to these adjustments. And as I said, when you talk about the regular season, well, maybe a team on Monday did a good job against you, and then you're on to Wednesday against a completely different team that doesn't do a good job against you. In this case, he's got to make adjustments to the adjustments made towards him, and he hasn't done a good job of that. Now, does that mean he can't do it in the future? No, I expect him to be a superstar player.
No question. And we talk about that all the time. A Tuesday night in January in Memphis, you're not seeing the same game plan against you as you are against the same team every single night in May. No question.
And that's what I kind of said. Even if that Tuesday night game in Memphis, maybe they did shut you down. But guess what? The Thursday game isn't in Memphis. It's somewhere else against another team that's probably not going to do the same thing. Whereas in the playoffs, hey, Boston shut them down completely in Game 2. Same team shows up for Game 3. Same team's going to show up for Game 4. So unless you figure it out, you're going to continue to struggle.
John McMullen's with us here, and he writes at 97.3ESPN.com. You can also check out John, who's writing now with GetMoreSports.com on the NFL. He'll be writing NFL columns for GetMoreSports.com, adding that to his list of NFL coverage. This morning, Carson Wentz reiterating that Week 1 is the goal for him, and as we're getting closer, early December, torn ACL. He added that his rehab has been going great. Everything's going well. But as we're getting closer, are you getting a better feel that Week 1 will be realistic or not?
Yeah, I think everything is on pace for Week 1. I think, the Eagles put up another hype video since the media is not allowed in yet. We'll be in there on Friday. It showed Carson throwing the football. He said he's begun running. He isn't wearing a jersey yet, so obviously, but you're not going to see that in the off season. We always know. We knew the rehab process is going to take right in that 9-month area, and it's almost eerie. He was injured on December 10th. 9 months is September 10th. The opener's on September 6th. So I've said time and time again on this show, I just know how hard Carson works. There's not going to be any stone unturned. He's going to do everything he has to do in his rehab, and he's going to get cleared. He's going to get cleared for September 6th. So then your question is, how should you throw him out there with no work in the preseason, very little practice? Because if he's back at practice, cleared for practice, it'll probably be a week or two at most. And that's your question. Do you throw him out there with that little much of preparation time as a full clear? And my answer to that is just looking at the history of this league. If you're a superstar player and you're cleared medically, you're on the field. So I've always expected to see him Week 1. I continue to expect to see him Week 1. And that's kind of what he said this morning on the NFL Network.
Yeah, he says, as an aggressive player, I'm not going to change. I believe I'll be back and better than ever. Now, the one thing is he has kind of said, look, I know that, but do you think the Eagles have suggested to him that he can't be as aggressive?
Oh, they've been suggesting that to him before he got hurt. I mean, that's been a constant point of emphasis since his rookie season. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter how big you are, it doesn't matter how athletic, you're going to take a pounding in this league. And if you don't sort of learn to protect your body at times, injuries are going to pile up. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that Carson wouldn't have gotten injured on the play he got injured if he was being more careful. But that was a frustration of Doug Peterson, and it was a frustration of Frank Reich and John DeFilippo when they were here.
Yeah,
they constantly talked to him about that. And if you remember that Carolina game where Chris Maragos got hurt, And if you remember that play at the goal line where he lowered his shoulder and tried to barrel into the end zone, they were fuming at that play. Didn't get hurt, but they talked to him about it. He admitted it. It's just the way he plays, and it's sort of in the DNA of him as a player. It's really difficult to change, but he's going to have to try.
John, that's the kind of things that initially Philly fans, they love. Like, oh, you're tough, you're getting in there. But at the same time, the coaching staff has to cringe and say, like, how many times do we have to tell you you're our franchise guy? Don't do that.
Yeah, well, and it is. It's not like he wants to do it. It's just, as I said, he almost defaults to it. That's the way he's always played. You know, in a weird way, I think the fact that when he is cleared, whether that's week 1, week 2, week 3, whenever it is, he's going to have to wear a brace. So I think in a weird way that might help him a little bit because that does affect you at least somewhat when it comes to mobility. So that could be one of those things that looks like it's not good on the surface, but maybe helps him long term because it sort of puts in the back of his mind, look, I really have to focus on being more careful and doing things to keep myself on the field.
And, you know, John, you can go through the names. Like, if Wentz doesn't learn how to protect himself better, then how do the Eagles protect themselves from having to go through, like, what the Colts did with Andrew Luck, or the Texans with Deshaun Watson, or the Dolphins with Ryan Tannehill, or the Packers with Aaron Rodgers? I think you get my theme here.
Well, for the short term, it's no issue whatsoever because the Eagles have the best backup quarterback in football, and he won the Super Bowl. So
he rang the bell the other night. He cost the Sixers the game.
I know. Who thought Nick Foles would be involved with anything that involves losing?
Although that was my prediction of who would ring the bell, right, PT?
That was my. Well,
we were driving up. I said it's got to be Nick Foles. I would
have liked Andrew Toney though. Still want that.
Maybe tonight. Boston Strangle out tonight. And Andrew Toney rings the bell tonight.
Pay him whatever it costs. That's my theory, John. Just get him in here.
That is a good one, Pete. But sadly, I don't think people remember Andrew Toney as one of the great shooting guards of that era. But with Nick, obviously, he's a great backup quarterback. I mean, that's as good as it gets when it comes to a backup quarterback. And the Eagles have it for one more year, and that's the difficult part because it's not financially tenable for them to continue it more than one more year. So that's the discussion we've been having the entire offseason, the value of keeping them around as a really, really sound insurance policy versus getting as much as you can for them when you can. And that's always with any NFL team, if you're in that kind of circumstance. New England went through it last year with Jimmy Garoppolo. It's a difficult decision to make.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. You can check out his NFL column at getmoresports.com. John, let's take a look at some of the NFL news. Number one, Zane Beadles was cut. I just like to say Zane Beadles. That's fun. 2, Hugh Jackson came out. Tyrod Taylor is the starter. That won't change. They played yo-yo last year with the starting quarterback in Cleveland. Do you expect to see Baker Mayfield start sooner or later?
Sooner. It's and I say this about every team in the offseason. Said it about Chicago last year when they were saying the same type of things with Mike Glennon. It's easy to say that in the offseason, and then when you start losing, there's such pressure to get a top 5 pick on the field. Now, Tyrod Taylor is a solid quarterback. He's not going to make a ton of mistakes. So from that standpoint, Cleveland has to get better. We always talk about from 0-16, you can't get worse. So it's conceivable they start out 2-2 or 2-3, and you can push it down the line. But once it becomes clear that they're not a contender, people are going to want to see the kid on the field, and that's every NFL city. And it's really difficult as a coach to kind of forge through that pressure and not do it. It might be the right thing to do, but it's really difficult not to pull the trigger.
C.J. Anderson heading to Carolina. Savvy move there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see that a lot. There's a few guys out there you're going to see. We talked about defensive tackle with the Eagles after Tim Jernigan news, and guys like Jonathan Hankins are still out there, Terrell McLean, C.J. Anderson, names you're going to recognize. And now that the draft is done and undrafted free agency is done, you have sort of the second market because teams look at what they didn't get, and they know they really have to fill these holes now. So it starts picking up a little bit again.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. And check out his new column at GetMoreSports.com. And you can check out, you got that piece on Eric Reed over there, which, is not getting a whole heck of a lot of attention, but maybe should. Here's a guy, 26, 27 years old, no job.
Yeah, a little bit different than Colin Kaepernick. Same reasons behind it, same reasons behind the collusion grievance. He was offered a one-year deal by the 49ers, did not take it. So it's difficult to say he shouldn't have a job or he couldn't have a job because he had the opportunity to accept that contract. Problem was, safety market's been really, really slow. This season, he was only offered $550,000, and then he visited the Bengals, and it comes out that Mike Brown asked him if he was going to continue to kneel during the national anthem. He would not answer that, and the Bengals didn't offer him a contract. So from the collusion standpoint, they're trying to sort of tie Brown, people like Jerry Jones, directly to the president, which is a bit of a strange take because collusion from a business sense it has to involve two people in that business. So if it was, say, Roger Goodell telling Mike Brown, you can't sign this guy, well, that's collusion. But everybody knows, or they should know, from a common sense standpoint, that didn't happen. So really it becomes more of a, as is almost everything in our society today, and a chance to polarize further and get divisive things out there, and it's a shame.
So much more I want to try to get into on the NFL. We'll probably do this on tomorrow's show, but Jets quarterback situation, Ben Roethlisberger kind of being a jerk for the most part. The quarterback situation going on in Baltimore where Joe Flacco has, quote, gotten the message based on their rookie camps out there. So we will dive into some more quarterback stuff with John tomorrow. Don't forget, at JF McMullen. Check out his Eagles coverage at 97.3ESPN.com. And his column on the NFL is at GetMoreSports.com. John, a lot of football still to talk tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, guys.